GTA 6 is definitely coming out eventually, and now there's a lot of speculation about what city or region the game will be located in. I've made a list of 10 cities or areas where I'd like to see the game. Location should be a city that has distinct features and landmarks, and different areas that should provide variety. It shouldn't just be a city that looks all monotonous and stuff. Like how GTA 5, there's areas like Rockford Hills that were really rich, as well as poor areas like South Los Santos. I'd like to see some variety like that. It should be a place that's easy to make fun of because comedy is a big part of GTA games. Like how in GTA 5 they made fun of the tech companies a lot and they make fun of like the self-absorbed culture of Southern California. It should be a place that has a lot of gang activity as well because it could make the story a bit more realistic. So number 10 would be Tokyo, Japan. I honestly don't see this happening because Rockstar has implied that they don't want to move the game outside of the US. But Tokyo could be a good location because there's a lot of stereotypes and different cultures of Japan that could be mocked in the game, similar to how Americans are mocked in all the GTA games. And the city is really big and there's different neighborhoods with different styles that could give a lot of variety. And it's very different than any city that can be used. It's probably the most different that it could possibly be. However, if you mock Japanese culture, it cause more controversy than mocking American culture. I don't really understand why. It's a double standard, but whatever. The culture is also unfamiliar, and it's completely different than the culture of most of the GTA players. And I know some people want something that they can somewhat relate to. Although Japan's famous for some gangs, it's not really prevalent, and there's not a lot of gun violence or gang wars in Japan. And it wouldn't be really realistic to have GTA there. Number 9 would be something involving the US-Canada border. Probably Detroit and Windsor or Detroit and Toronto would be the best, as well as Seattle and Vancouver. The international border would be an interesting aspect, because missions could involve smuggling drugs or weapons across, and the story could be realistic if smuggling was included, because there is a lot of smuggling going on between the two countries. Unlike Japan, Canada can be mocked without creating a lot of controversy. Having two countries would also give a lot of variety to the game. However, Canada really isn't famous for crime or gangs. And unless you live in Canada, you don't really stereotype any city as a city with a gang problem, like how Los Angeles and Miami are. Number 8 would be Washington, D.C. There are so many possible storylines involving the government and politicians. Politics can be easily joked about, which would make the game really funny. However, even if government wasn't included, the city has a lot of distinct landmarks and neighborhoods. It's also known as a city for having a gang problem. The gangs would make it a more typical GTA storyline. Unfortunately though, if the game was based in DC, it would cause a lot of controversy if there's politicians involved, especially if the politicians are the targets of crime. Number 7 would be Detroit. I already mentioned this in part of the map that included the Canadian border, but now I'm going to focus more specifically on the city. Detroit is known as being a crime and gang-ridden city, and a lot of interesting storylines and realistic storylines could be made in Detroit. However, there isn't as much variety in Detroit as in other cities. I know that there's some really rich areas, but a lot of the city's poor, and there's not really any stereotypical rich area like there was in Los Angeles for GTA 5. Like how Rockford Hills was used as a parody of Beverly Hills, Detroit doesn't really have anything like that. Number 6 would be the San Francisco or the Bay Area. This would be best if Oakland and San Jose were also used, but it would be good with just San Francisco itself as well. The city is really well known and there's a lot of landmarks and there's a lot of nice scenery. All the parks and mountains and stuff around could also add the aspect of the outdoors that was in GTA 5 with Blaine County. If the entire Bay Area was used, it would be interesting with San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose because they all have distinct features and different characteristics. The culture of the Bay Area is very easy to make fun of, which would make a hilarious and interesting storyline. However, the city has already been used, and some people might want a completely new city. And actually, San Andreas was pretty good because San Fierro was somewhat realistic, and they had a lot of the landmarks that were famous. Number 5 is Miami. This has already been used in Vice City, but it would be kind of interesting to see it again. The city can have a variety of neighborhoods like the beaches, downtown, and the sprawling suburbs, and then you could use the Everglades and the areas west of the city for the rural or wilderness areas like Blaine County was in GTA 5. The city is also well known for gangs, and a lot of missions could be designed with like getting drugs off of ships that came from South America or something like that. However, like San Francisco, some people want a new city that hasn't been used in a GTA game before. Number 4 would be Las Vegas, which I would actually really like back in GTA, but preferably with another city because just the city itself might be kind of boring eventually. Like, just the casinos would provide a really good possibility for missions and stories. Just like robbing the vaults would make a good heist, and just like the gambling itself would be fun because I really enjoyed that in GTA San Andreas, and I think they should have put it in GTA 5 as well, especially when they have that casino in GTA 5 that isn't actually used. The city is also famous for gangs, especially in the past when the casinos were owned by the gangsters. Unfortunately, other than the casinos, the city doesn't have a lot of distinct features. If you visit Las Vegas, you mostly go to the Strip, and if you're off of the Strip or downtown, there's pretty much nothing that interesting. Most of the city looks the same. And again, some people want a completely new city that hasn't been used before. So number 3 is Chicago. I'd actually really like this because there's a lot of distinct features and landmarks and it hasn't been used in GTA before. And both now and in the past, it's really famous for gangs. The story could either include the Mafia back in the 20s or it could be street gangs now. Unfortunately, the city's really flat, so you'd miss out on a lot like there was in GTA 5 with Mount Chiliad and just the sand dunes and everything out in Blaine County. Chicago doesn't really have anything like that, so the wilderness aspect of the game would probably be quite boring. Number 2 would be the US-Mexico border, which would be kind of similar to the Canadian border with the smuggling. But I'd like to have San Diego and Tijuana or El Paso and Juarez. But it would be best if they included another city, like if they had San Diego and Tijuana, if LA was in there. Or if it was El Paso and Juarez, it'd be nice to have like San Antonio or another Texan city in there. A lot of the storyline and missions could be involving smuggling between the two countries, especially when Mexico is actually really famous for having problems like that. Unlike with the Canadian border where it happens but it's not really as prevalent as with the Mexican border and it's not really famous. With the US-Mexican border though, it could have a lot of interesting and realistic storylines. There could be stuff like the cartels moving drugs and weapons across the border, or there could be missions involving smuggling or trying to get illegal immigrants across the border. I'd actually really like to have this map in the game, and I think the only drawback of having it is that if you mock Mexican culture, similar to how you mock Japanese culture, it's kind of more controversial than if you mock American culture. However, I don't think they'd really care that much about it since the game causes so much controversy anyway. And number 1 is just multiple cities. It doesn't really matter which cities, I would just like more than one. It could be like a San Andreas remake with the 3 cities or something like New York, Philadelphia, and Boston. I'd actually be really disappointed though if they had LA or New York again with just those cities but no other city, because it would basically be a remake of GTA 4 or 5, and I don't really feel like you need that considering both games are so detailed. The biggest benefit to this map would be that if you don't like a city or if you just get bored of it, you can go to the other city. And the 2 cities would probably be different from each other, so they'd look completely different and have different characteristics, and the stories and the missions involving those cities would be different. However, the problem with this is that the map would have to be really big if you wanted detailed cities, or the cities would be made too small. As much as I like the map in San Andreas, if the cities were that small for GTA 6, I'd be pretty disappointed. So that's my top 10 of cities or areas that I'd like to have in GTA 6. I only included one map that was entirely outside the US just because Rockstar has implied that they want to keep it in the US. I think the most likely place that the game would be based though would be Miami. Los Santos was a remake of part of the map of San Andreas, and then GTA 4 was a remake of the map in GTA 3, so it seems pretty likely that it could be Miami. But Rockstar has also implied that they'd want to have multiple cities, and I know some people want like an entire map of the US that has all the cities they've ever used, and including some new ones, but I honestly don't see that as likely just because of the amount of like programming that you'd need for that. I know like games like The Crew have done that, but if you look at the map in The Crew compared to GTA, it's not detailed at all. The buildings, you can't enter any of them, you can't get out of your car. GTA is just more detailed and they need a smaller map just because it's so detailed. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this list. If you have any cities that you have in mind, put them in the comments.